The film begins in 1959 in a region in Indochina located in Burma, Myanmar, where in that year, France, which had previously colonized the region for years, was finally defeated by Myanmar troops. Unfortunately, several years after Myanmar took over the territory, several colonial groups still controlled Indochina. That place became an area where criminals or international war fugitives such as fugitives from European countries, former members of Nazi Germany, and various other major criminal organizations were hiding. Some soldiers who have retired from their service also prefer to live there because it still does not have a stable local authority. Several prisoners of war also preferred to stay on their own. However, few of them were forced to stay in the area because they were detained by someone more powerful than them. Most of them in that place were often forced to fight in one-on-one duels until one of them died. The duel battle became a betting arena for powerful officials to get a lot of money. One of the men used as fighting slaves in that place was a tough guy named Martin Tillman, a dashing man who won the most fights. That day, Martin was taken by 2 police guards to an area in the middle of the forest, where a death duel would be held. In this battle, he will face another prisoner of war named Isro, who is much bigger than him. The person who recruited Martin as a fighting slave was a corrupt European official named Steiner. After the fight, referee fired his gun. The deadly duel between Martin and Isro finally started, and everyone looked enthusiastic about watching the fierce match. Even though Isro has much stronger physical strength than him, Martin is still able to dominate the fight with the fighting techniques that he has mastered while he was in the military for the last few years. After a tense fight between them, Martin ended the fight by throwing a very hard uppercut to Isro's chin. After Martin was declared the winner of the fight, Steiner ordered his executioner Rastignac to execute Isro with a sharp machete. Martin, who witnessed the heinous incident, could only remain silent without being able to do much to help his fellow prisoners of war. After the fight ended, 2 police officers returned him to his holding cell in the village. On the way, Martin ran into a young woman named Isabella, who was carrying some flowers to give to Steiner. Suddenly, the 2 officers escorting him seduced the woman in a lecherous way that made Isabella uncomfortable. Martin, who realized this, immediately beat one of the guard officers by smashing his head at the officer to teach him a lesson. So, every week, Isabella always comes to Steiner's house to send bouquets of flowers to him, but it is still unknown what her reason for doing all that is. That afternoon when Isabella was walking in Martin's holding cell, he asked her why she sent a bouquet of flowers to Steiner, even though Steiner was a corrupt ruler who never cared about her presence. Without giving an answer to his question, Isabella instead asked Martin if he also wanted to be visited every week. Deep down, she felt that Martin was actually a good person and cared for other people, but he just had a bit of bad luck, so he had to end up in the holding cell. However, Martin refused her offer and said he did not need help from anyone. On the other hand, a former Vietnam military commander named Boone, currently Steiner's right-hand man, reports that someone wants to meet him. Apparently, the person who came to visit Steiner was a British police agent named Harrison, searching for one of the British war fugitives. Harrison reveals to Steiner that he is currently looking for a prisoner of war named Martin Tillman and is tasked with bringing Martin back to England to be court-martialed. Hearing this, Steiner pretended he did not know anything about Martin and said he had never known a prisoner named Martin. He deliberately hid Martin's whereabouts from Harrison because he didn't want to lose one of his best fighters, who had made a lot of profit for him so far. After he said that, Boone immediately drove Harrison away from that place. Moments after Harrison left his headquarters, Steiner asked his men to take Martin to his office. After he finds out that Martin is an international war fugitive, he plans to make a small offer to Martin. Then Steiner tells Martin that he is not the only criminal in the room because almost all of his men or accomplices are criminals or war fugitives. His executioner, Rastignac, was a former Special Forces officer from Spain who had fought with the German Nazi group. After that, there is Corporal Boone, who was a former Special Forces commander from Vietnam who was once considered a hero by the Vietnamese people, but now the Vietnamese government even betrayed him and accused him of being a country traitor. Then there is his loyal friend, Amarillo, a former military soldier from Berlin who had fought with the Nazis but has now been exiled there. After introducing his men, Steiner said that he would release Martin from the prisoner of war cell starting that day. He intends to get Martin to join his much stronger group and alliance to control the territory of Indochina. However, Martin refuses his invitation to join his group and prefers to start normal life without getting involved in fights or wars. Hearing that, Steiner respected Martin's decision and let him leave because Steiner was sure that he would not be able to go far from that place, considering that all British agents were hunting him in various places. After walking quite a distance, Martin arrived in the middle of the village and stopped at a bar which turned out to be managed by Isabella's adoptive father named Valentine. When she realized that Martin had been released from the Steiner detention cell, she was very happy and immediately introduced him to her other family members. When Martin was talking with Valentine, he was still curious about Isabella and Steiner's relationship. Then he asked Valentine why she sent bouquets of flowers to Steiner every week. Valentine explained that Isabella's mother, Samsip Sam, had married Steiner during the Burmese War. But after Isabella was born, he thought that Samsip had been having an affair with another man. Since then, he immediately kicked her out of his house and never acknowledged Isabella as his daughter. Therefore, Isabella always visited his house every week to give a bouquet of flowers in the hope that Steiner would be willing to recognize her as his daughter. Soon after, Valentine offers Martin to work as a bouncer at his bar and allows Martin to stay temporarily at his house. Hearing that, he happily accepted the offer and began to live a normal life as an ordinary young man without getting involved in any fights. Over time, the relationship between Martin and Isabella slowly began to get closer, and they showed mutual interest in one another. One night when Valentine's bar was busy with visitors, a dispute occurred between a man and a member of the gangster group in that place. Then Valentine asked Martin to separate them, but because they were unwilling to listen to him, he was forced to throw them out of that place. Unfortunately, the gangster boss, who did not accept the treatment to his members, immediately approached Martin and challenged him to a fight. The gangster boss provokes him by insulting him because the man thinks Martin is just an ordinary barman. But he didn't seem to care about the man's insult, so the man felt angry and immediately threw a punch at his face. Then Martin swiftly repelled the attack and started fighting the gangster boss until the boss was defeated. Fortunately, he could defeat all of the gangster's men one by one without getting hurt, so they decided to leave that place. The next day, Corporal Boone and Rastignac come to Valentine's bar to meet Martin, who previously beat up all the gangsters alone. Shortly after, Rastignac tells him that the man he beat earlier was one of Steiner's top fighters. As a result, the fighter suffered a serious injury and could not fight in a deadly duel, resulting in a sizable loss to Steiner. After that, Corporal Boone relays Steiner's message wanting Martin to take responsibility for the loss by replacing that fighter in the next fight. Rastignac also threatens that they will move their operation to Valentine's bar and expel everyone in the place, including Valentine and Isabella, if he refuses to fight. And if Martin is willing to participate in winning the match by a landslide, Steiner will pay him a sizable fee. Hearing that, Martin could only silently surrender, knowing he had no choice but to follow Steiner's words. After they left the bar, Valentine tried to calm him down and asked him not to worry too much about him or Isabella. The next morning when it was still dark, Martin said goodbye to Isabella to go to Steiner's headquarters and participate in the deadly duel. After walking quite a distance, he finally arrived at Steiner's headquarters and met with Steiner, who had been waiting for his arrival for a long time. Without delay, Martin was immediately brought to the battle arena in the forest, where everyone was excited to witness the fight of one of the best fighters who had been so hard to beat. At that place, many people spent a lot of money betting on Martin because they believed he could win the fight, and Steiner made a lot of money. In the first fight, Martin beat his opponent quite easily, and Steiner seemed satisfied with his performance. After he had managed to win the match, the party that held the fight directly confronted Martin with the next few fighters, and he still continued to dominate the fight with consecutive wins in a row. Martin was allowed to fight continuously without a break and only got a very short rest at each turn of the match. However, even though he continues to be forced by Steiner to carry out the deadly duel fight repeatedly, Martin still manages to beat every fighter that becomes his opponent. As a result, Steiner and his group reap a lot of profits from betting on the fight thanks to their top fighters. On the other hand, Harrison, who apparently still hasn't left Burma, comes to Valentine's bar to ask about Martin's whereabouts after he hears the news that Martin works at the bar. Then Valentine admitted that Martin had worked at the bar and even lived for some time at his house, but by this time, he had gone elsewhere. Valentine deliberately hides the fact that Martin is currently at Steiner's headquarters after learning that Harrison is hunting him. Soon after, Harrison explained that Martin was wanted by the British police because he had previously caused chaos in England under the pretext of seeking revenge for the death of his family, who died on the battlefield. Then Harrison promised a payment of 10,000 euros if Valentine was willing to tell Martin's current whereabouts. However, Valentine and Isabella preferred to remain silent because they did not want to betray his kindness, who had helped them both. After Martin finished his fight that day, Steiner invited him to relax while chatting. Steiner reveals to Martin that he is a former war fugitive like Martin because he was a member of the German Nazis. Steiner again invited Martin to join his group, and he promised a sizable profit if Martin was willing to join his group. After making the offer, Steiner paid him for the fight he had won that day. The next day at his office, Steiner secretly wrote a special letter that he would give to Isabella. It turned out that all this time, he had actually known that Isabella was his daughter. However, he still could not accept her because he could not forgive Samsip for betraying him with another man. After writing the letter, Steiner kept the letter behind the wedding photo of him and Samsip in his office. Back to Martin, who had arrived at Valentine's residence and was able to meet Isabella again. After considering several things, Valentine suggests he move abroad with Isabella and start a new, better life. Martin, who had wanted a normal life from the start, immediately agreed to this because he wanted to make Isabella happy. Moreover, the British investigative agency is currently hunting for him in that city, so it would be better for him and Isabella to leave that place immediately. Then Valentine said he plans to sell his bar after making sure Isabella is safe with Martin and then move to Thailand to build a new business. Hearing that, Martin agreed to the plan, but before that, he had to raise more money so he could get a new place to live with her. He plans to participate in one more dueling match to earn more money and use the money to start a new life with Isabella. The next day, Martin arrives at Steiner's for one last duel. But strangely, Steiner said that no other fighter dared to fight him because, so far, he had never experienced defeat. Steiner suggested that Martin give up the duel fight that day and he would give Martin a hefty bonus. He would have much more to gain as people bet Martin has huge money. Then Martin accepted his offer and followed his plan because he wanted to get more money from the fight. In the afternoon, when the game started, everyone started placing their bets on the dealer working with Steiner. Martin, who was fighting on the battlefield then, started issuing light attacks against the opponent and behaved more passively than usual. Martin purposely allowed the opponent to issue several counterattacks without dodging them completely. After a fairly short fight, he starts executing Steiner's plan to let the opponent win the match so he can earn more money. Steiner was very satisfied after learning that Martin had lost the duel because it turned out that he had other plans. He intentionally tricked Martin into giving up the fight because Valentine had previously given up his bar as a bet for Martin's victory. Unfortunately, Steiner and his group have arranged the fight so that Martin loses the match so they can get Valentine's bar assets. When Valentine and Isabella heard that Martin had lost the game, they immediately suspected Steiner had rigged it. And their suspicions were finally confirmed after Isabella pressed Rastignac to tell what really happened during the fight. Amarillo then asked them to leave immediately, but Isabella, who did not accept Martin's defeat, immediately slapped him. As a result, there was a heated argument between Amarillo and Isabella, so Valentine got involved in the fight and threatened him with a weapon. But Rastignac immediately seized the weapon and fired several shots at them until both fell helplessly. Shortly after that, Martin, who had just arrived at Valentine's residence and did not know anything, had to become the target of Rastignac's weapon. After that, Rastignac and the others rushed to bury Martin, Isabella, and Valentine in the forest so the local authorities would not suspect them. But fortunately, Martin and Isabella were still able to survive the shooting, and he immediately entrusted Isabella with local residents so that she could get medical treatment immediately. Meanwhile, Martin practices martial arts with an old man he meets in the middle of the forest because he is determined to take revenge for Valentine's death. After practicing for several days, Martin finally mastered martial arts that are far superior, and he is ready to finish off all members of the Steiner gang. At first, he goes to Valentine's bar, which is now controlled by Amarillo's gang, and starts slaughtering everyone in the place one by one. Unfortunately, Amarillo managed to escape from that place and went straight to Steiner's headquarters to report what had happened at Valentine's bar. Amarillo, who felt panicked and scared, warned him and the others to be on alert because Martin would soon be chasing them all. Hearing this report, Steiner ordered Amarillo and his men to move the money they had kept somewhere because he thought that Martin was after their money. But when Amarillo and several soldiers arrived at their headquarters to retrieve the money they had kept there, Martin had also arrived to massacre them in that place. He had to face dozens of people alone. He killed them one by one with weapons he had stolen from the soldiers. After Amarillo and the soldiers in that place died, Martin had absolutely no intention of taking the money in the bases safe because his original purpose for doing all this was to avenge Valentine's death. On the other hand, Steiner and his troops have also prepared in their respective positions to face Martin's attack, which will soon arrive at their headquarters. After Martin rested for one night in a forest, in the morning, he immediately rushed to Steiner's headquarters from behind secretly. After successfully infiltrating the base, he began eliminating the soldiers one by one in that place and seized their weapons to defeat Steiner's men. Even though it took a long time, Martin finally defeated all of Steiner's men and managed to enter the office where Steiner had been prepared with his machine gun. When Martin entered that room, Steiner immediately showered him with hundreds of bullets, but he managed to avoid all of the shots. After killing all of Steiner's bodyguards in the room, Martin immediately stabbed Steiner with a sword until he died. Corporal Boone, who had just returned to headquarters, was shocked by the state of the headquarters, which was in a very messy state, and all of the Steiner members who had died at the hands of Martin. After that, he challenged Martin to fight a duel without using weapons and fight until one of them died. Hearing that, Martin took up the challenge and started fighting Corporal Boone, who became very adept at martial arts to the point that it overwhelmed him. When Martin was cornered, he was forced to cheat by killing Corporal Boone using Corporal Boone's own sniper rifle. After all of the Steiner members had been paralyzed, he accidentally found a photo and a letter that had been written by Steiner, so he decided to keep the letter along with it. After that, Martin went to Rastignac's headquarters to kill him and his men. Even though they had prepared a machine gun to face Martin, he could still dominate the battle and finish off all of them. When Rastignac began to realize that he could not face Martin in that fight, he decided to run away from that place. The next day, Martin begins to pack up the photos and letters left by Steiner to send to Isabella and continues to search for Rastignac's whereabouts in the area for several weeks. Sadly, Rastignac now has no money or friends who can help him, so he decides to go see Martin because he is tired of running away from Martin. At the same time, Isabella, who has recovered, has also received a package sent by Martin, and she feels very happy to know that her father has loved her very much all this time. The next day after Rastignac met Martin, he immediately challenged Martin to fight one-on-one without using any weapons. However, when the duel began, it turned out that he had prepared a knife, and he managed to injure Martin with the knife. Luckily, Martin could disarm the knife, so they fought with their bare hands this time. Although Rastignac seemed to excel in the fight, in the end, Martin beat him and immediately killed him to ensure he was really dead. After his revenge mission has been fulfilled, Martin rests in his car while smoking a cigar to celebrate his victory. Not long after, Harrison came over to him and gave him two choices: surrendering to the British police or joining a secret force agent with Harrison. Hearing that, Martin accepted the second offer, so he could have the opportunity to meet Isabella again. The film ends. The moral message that we can learn from this film is to fight as hard as you can to protect the people we care about.